happy to see you here tonight. We have a wonderful speaker who's been one of our members for years, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce him. This is Craig Smith. He's from Katromet, one of our own.
Thanks, Louise. And thanks to you all for coming out. I was on the board of the BSHP for a few years, and then I had to do more work, so I couldn't be involved as much as I'd like to. It's a great organization, full of volunteers, and they've done a great job with the house, so I'm really glad to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the things I know about and to get you folks out here. I've been working on old houses for a little over 20 years, and I talk a lot about restoration, and I talk about preservation, and I find that a lot of these terms get confused. And I get a lot of stories about people who did things to houses and they call it one thing when I think it's another thing. So here's sort of my viewpoint on these different terms. And I'm going to take you through a few of the slides and a few of the projects I've done. So if we can, if I can drive everything properly here. Restoration and preservation are really philosophies rather than processes necessarily. And this is what I find when I start to talk to a customer. Really, it's about what direction you want to take the project and what is it you're doing. And people sort of point to objects and they point to things and they point to aspects of the house, but it's really about what's in your mind and what direction you're going with the project. I kind of like to use this old joke, this old adage about my grandfather's hammer. And it's kind of like the USS Constitution in a lot of ways. If you see this hammer here, well, this is my grandfather's hammer. And I just put a new handle on it. And my father, he put a new head on it. So this is my grandfather's hammer here. And, this is what some people say about the Constitution. There's really nothing left of it there, the USS Constitution in Boston and Charlestown, that it's been restored so many times that the original isn't there anymore. So really it's, is this hammer, is this my original? Is it a restoration or is it, what is it? So that's really kind of, one of the jokes that I have. But thankfully, we have some guidelines. And this is kind of where you get into some of the dull stuff. There's an agency called the Secretary of the Interior, and they're part of the National Park Service, and they have guidelines for what's preservation, rehabilitation, and restoring historic buildings. And so this is a great place to start if you want to start getting down into dividing what's what. There's a booklet for it, and we'll get into this. We're not going to read every line here. I'm not going to make you read all the different parts of this, but what I find is important, really, is the second line here, is that the historic character of a property will be retained and preserved. The replacement of intact or repairable historical material or alteration of features, spaces, and spatial relationships that characterize a property will be avoided. And this is for preservation. Really what you're doing is you're keeping what's there. That's really the key thing about preservation. And I kind of like to use the adage, just leave it alone. Another resource that I like to use is something called the Historic American Building Survey. And this was started in the 30s as part of the WPA. And they send people out to go out and catalog and inventory historic structures. This one happens to be the Atwood House in Chatham. So they took drawings of floor plans and exterior elevations and also took photographs. So there's the Atwood House in 1935. So not only does this give us a date for that house, but it gives us an idea of what the style was of the area and what things were probably original on the house and what it looked like at the time. So even if you have a house down the street, it was probably looked very similar, or some of the features look similar. And here's the Atwood House now. It's pretty well restored and preserved, sort of a combination of the two. But you can see that the vegetation has changed drastically, and there's been some additions, which is pretty common for historic houses, and it's part of the story of the house, which I think is just as important as preserving the house itself, but preserving the story of the house, of what alterations had happened and who lived in the house and things that have occurred. So really preservation can be a progressive thing. You may be preserving the 1700s section of the house and the 1800s section of the house and the 1900s section of the house all at the same time. Another shot of the Atwood house. You can see the gable end that we saw in the earlier photograph. But here's the other part of this, is that preservation isn't always pretty. And this is what I call preservation by neglect. And as we get older and time passes by, you find fewer and fewer of these. But really, this house is a little bit derelict, but all the original pieces are there. And it's only original once. And so really, one of the things that I like to do is look around to houses that are looking kind of sad, because all the original pieces are there and the preservation is there. And you can either save what's there. If it gets lost, at least you can document what's there and you can understand how you may restore a house that's next door or down the street. There's the original door. It's a Greek Revival door, detailed. The original sash are there. The columns, the pilasters are there. Everything is there that's the original part of that house. And that's preservation in a way. One of the things that we like to think about is something called historic fabric, which is the parts, the pieces, the wood of the house. And once it's gone, it's gone. So that you find that people just throw stuff out and you can never get it back unless you either can interpret what was there, look at the Habs drawings, or try to look at a house down the street that's original and try to get it back. But that concept of keeping the historic fabric is really a key part of preservation, to a point where we'll look at later on some of the things that I've done to preserve some of the original fabric of a house. Why do we care about preservation? That's part of the thing. Is like you find a lot of people say, get rid of that old house, like that Greek Revival we just looked at. It looks like it's about to fall down. Just bulldoze it. One of the things that's, to me personally, is very important is the respect for the workmanship and the amount of labor that went into something in the old days. It's a tremendous amount of work. It's a connection of the past. You can be in the same structure that somebody was 100 years ago, or you can touch the same surface that somebody did 100 years ago. I like to call it as a handshake with the past. You can touch that object. You can touch a piece of wood that's been hand planed, and you can feel the ripples on that piece of wood, the same ripples that the person who planed it felt. It's kind of a connection with the past. Higher quality material in the past. It's old growth forest is what they made this stuff out of, and you can't get that wood today. Oftentimes the quality of workmanship is higher, especially for the stuff we saved. A lot of the stuff that was kind of shabbily built has fallen down, it's gone. And so really the high quality craftsmanship is what's left. And as I said earlier, it's only original once. So that structure is really living history. It's really a connection to the past, and it's showing us what they did in the past. And the other thing about preservation is it really helps to characterize a neighborhood. There are a lot of landmarks. When you hear of a church burning, people are very upset typically because it's been a landmark in a town for a long, long time. This is the Coit Church, which has been pretty well preserved and also has had some restoration work done on it. It's an all-original church, and it's really a key focus to Wacoit. When you drive down that road, it's right there. Same thing with the Briggs McDermott house across the street and other structures I'm sure you can think of. And not just houses like this. I probably should have put in what I call vernacular houses too. Houses of the people. Just a regular house that you're used to driving by. It's been there for 200 years, and it's really part of the fabric of the house, of the community. So I'm going to do a little micro study here about preservation. And I was talking about sort of the workmanship and the amount of work it takes to do something. What we have here is just an ordinary 2-plank door. Looks pretty simple, right? It's just a plain old door. There's the inside of it. There's the outside of it. This door I know is from the 1700s. It came out of a 1700s house and went back into that house. But what does it take to make the door, especially in the 1700s? Well, first you got to cut the tree down, and then you got to cut the tree into planks. If you're not lucky enough to have a sawmill nearby, you have a pit saw with a guy down underneath, with sawdust falling on him and a guy up on top, with his shoulders burning to make the planks for the door. If you're fortunate enough to have a water-powered up and down sawmill, you can bring it to the sawmill, but you got to skid it with your horses or your oxen. Bring it to the sawmill, bring it made into planks, bring it back to the job site, and then you got to let it dry out for 6 months or a year. Now you have planks to build a door. It's rough sawn, so now you got to hand plane it to smooth it up. First, you're going to use this plane, which I have here, something similar to this. If you take a look at it, you'll find the bottom is concaved. It's convex. And so that this will get rid of all of the saw marks very quickly. It's called a scrub plane. It makes grooves in the plank, and then later on you'll smooth it with a smoothing plane. So that's some of the stuff that you'll still feel on these planks. That's all by hand. There's a smoothing plane there. And then you got to put a bead on it where the two planks go together, not to mention that you want to tongue and groove those two planks together. So then you have a beading plane, and now you've got yourself a two-plank door. If you look here, you can see this is tear out from where the original plane planed out the grain a little bit and pulled it and teared it. So now we've got the door. Now we have a latch. So now you talk to your local blacksmith. Blacksmith is some wrought iron, which was probably made in a foundry nearby out of bog iron, or perhaps brought over from England in the hull of a ship. Let's talk about building a ship to get it from England to here. This is what's called a Suffolk latch, so it's certainly pre-1800. It's a beam latch. This is hammered out here. We have nails that are handmade by the blacksmith. We have a staple again, handmade by the blacksmith. This screw is replaced. This is a modern screw. And the latch up here, this is probably an 1800s lock that's been removed. But these screws here may or may not have been made by a blacksmith, but they probably don't have points on them. They're called pointless screws. And they were made before they figured out how to make points on a screw. So that's all you need to do to make a two-plank door. Do you want to save this, or do you want to get rid of it? Personally, I'd like to save it. So that's sort of my talk on preservation. It's there's not a lot necessarily. Really, the idea is to leave it alone. Restoration's a lot more active. You do a lot more things when you're doing something that's restoration. And here again, the Secretary of Interior has standards for restoration of historic buildings. Restoration is defined as the act or process of accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared in a particular period of time. To me, that's what's really important. Because I talk to a lot of customers and we get into their house and there's different things going on in the house and they're trying to figure out how to repair it and how to fix it. And the key thing is to choose a date, especially if you might have a 1700s house that was updated in 1800 and again in 1850. The renovation people have been around forever. I still have a Harvest Gold stove in my house. I'll be honest with you. It works great. But people walk in and they say, that's so 70s. Well, somebody once walked into a house and said, that's so 1770s. You've got to update this house. And so you have to choose a date. Are you going to go back to when the house was originally built, or are you going to go back to some period in between? That's, for me, is a key part of restoration, is you're trying to go to a date. That's what makes it different from renovation and a lot of the other terms that I had up there, is you're really trying to get to a certain date and make it look like it was new from that date. And here again, we have all the guidelines, just to show you that there are some things to guide you when you go to do these projects. We don't have to read them or go through them all, but just if you look up the Secretary of Interior standards for restoration, this is what you're going to find. Why restoration? As I was talking about earlier, the original material usually lasts pretty well, but not always. It can just get too bad, and so it's either gone already or you're just too far. You got to take it out. Preserving the craftsmanship it's an interesting, very interesting thing in terms of philosophies, as I talked about earlier on. In England, really, what they try to do more so than in America, we like to preserve the originals. In England, they work more towards preserving the trades. And so they will more quickly replace something than they will here, as what they're trying to do is they're trying to preserve the trades and keep up those traditions about how to do something. It's a method, and also it's a method of how did they do that. A lot of times you learn by doing. And the same thing with method of understanding our ancestors. Why did they do it that way? You look at something and you'll go, why did they build it this way? And you go to restore and you go, wow, that's why, because this is the easiest way to do it, or it makes sense to do it that way. And you really begin to understand history in a really dynamic way, in a personal way, when you go to repeat what those people did before. You find out how they did it and why they did it that way. And the other thing about restoration is that you're making custom components that are really congruous with the original style and dimensions. You're not just getting something that's close from the lumberyard, but you're really making something that's exact that was there before. One of the reasons for restoration is that sometimes some of the parts are missing. In this house, this was in Chatham, Massachusetts. The house was mostly original. The homeowner bought the house. It was slated for demolition. It was great to be a part of this project, but the windows had been replaced in the 1950s. And so what I did is I made new windows for them. And there they are. This is some of the sash coming together. What's interesting here, particularly since it's in Chatham, is that this is a little detail. It's called Chatham sash. This is where you start to nerd out a little bit, and that most windows, when you look at them, these pieces here, the vertical pieces, which are called stiles, these usually go all the way through to the bottom. In Chatham, many of the sash have this bottom rail that goes all the way across. It's called Chatham sash, which personally I think is a better way to make a sash. If I kind of jumped ahead, a sash is this piece here, is a part of a window that holds the glass. And then I made new frames for them. And what we did to make these windows is we actually looked at another house in town that wasn't too far away and pulled the dimensions off of that house. Because the originals on the house we were working on were gone, but we had a house that had been preserved, and so we kind of knew what we were doing. And also what you come to find is that these windows all have the same dimensions pretty closely. What's unique about, or I shouldn't say unique, but what's special about earlier windows is the glass all came in a box, all pre-cut to even dimensions. That's one of your tips that you can get if you go to look at a window on a house. If the glass panes are 6 3/8 inches wide, it's not an original pane. They were usually 6 by 8, 8 by 10, some dimension like that. And so because of that, the windows typically grow out to basic dimensions. So usually a window is about, a 12 over 12 window is about 57 inches tall. It just keeps coming around and around and around. And that's one of the things that gives you the proportions and the dimensions of a house, is that it makes it look right because you're working off of dimensionally sized glass. And so here we have them installed. And sometimes another reason to do restoration is the unexpected happens. This was really an unfortunate incident. A pickup truck came through the front wall of this couple's house. A 1700 structure. It was one of the most interesting, fun projects I've ever worked on. Working on a project across the street. I noticed this house had been boarded up, and I went and banged on the door. And wound up working on the project, which was great. And so what had happened is that the truck came through the front door, through the front entrance, and wiped out one of the entrance, wiped out one of the walls, wiped out one of the posts in the middle, and wound up in their front living room. So you can see the staircase. And you can see it's beautiful. It's all original. This is the original staircase from the 1700s. It's steep. The proportions are proper so that it feels comfortable. This is a hand-carved top on the baluster. The spindles for the railing are probably turned by a foot treadle lathe. So everything's here. All the original is here. These are hand-planed panels. The people who owned the house had worked on the house before, and they'd done a lot of restoration work. They knew the value of what they had. And so they saved everything. They saved all the parts and all the pieces to the project. This is what I had when I arrived. There's the front door. There's one of the interior doors. You start looking through rubble. Everything's there. It's all in pieces, which is really neat because it's repairable. There's the front door. It looks like a mess. But one of the nice things about historic pieces is that you can take them apart and put them back together again. Everything is put together with a mortise and tenon joint. I don't know if people are familiar with it. This is one of the terms a lot of people don't know. Basically, a tenon is a square peg that fits into a square hole. And it's held together with a couple of pins. And here we have it here. It's really, most of the doors of that period are put together this very same way. And so there's just a panel that slides in and out. Goes together like that. And it's pinned together. And so you can take these apart and put them together. Same thing with windows. You can take them apart forever. Take a look, send that around, I guess. So with this door, what I did is I put new tenons on the ends of the pieces, made new panels that had really just been smashed, and put it all back together again. The same thing with the front entrance. We took that off of the front of the house, and here's one of the pilasters. It was split in half by the truck. I glued it back together again, added a piece on the bottom, and here we are. I'm saving the historic fabric. Sometimes you can get a little bit crazy if you're working particularly on a historic house where you're really saving just a very small part of it. In this situation, it was really a lot easier to save this than it would be to make a new pilaster and to carve it out. It was just a lot easier to do it this way. And I saved the historic fabric in the process. So here it is all together. And there's the front entrance back together again before primer. Which is interesting, somebody replaced the door during the Greek Revival period. So this is an 1800s door in a 1700s house. So this is part of the story. We chose to keep the original door. We could have built a new door, but they liked their door, and this was part of the story of the house. Same thing with the sash. It's put together with pins in the corners, or pegs. It's mortise and tenon. All I did was make up some new muntins, and the sash is back. We're ready to go. And the same thing with the window frame. This is all one piece in the top. If you look at these pieces, these are basically dimensioned, these are 3 by 4. They're solid pieces of wood. This top piece is all hand planed. This is done with a molding plane. And then the tenons had broken off, and what I did is and you can see the pinhole here. So I made new tenons and put it all back together again. I scabbed these on, saved the historic fabric, saved a little time. This is an interior door, same process. Now the interior wall is going back in here. And there's the other side of it. That door is open here. And you can see some of the repair work here on the interior. It's all paneled wood. It's all hand-planed, handmade wood, handmade panels. And there's the house back together again. So, a friend of mine did the timber frame work on it, and I did the windows and the doors. But you can see, particularly with this house, if you don't restore this window, and you replace it, it's either going to look odd, or now you've got to replace all the windows in the house. And here again, here's more of the story of the house. On this end are the original 1700s windows. The smaller panes. Glass was expensive early on. And so the larger the pane, the more expensive the glass was. And so early windows tended to have smaller panes of glass, unless you were in a seaport like Salem or Boston. And then the fronts, these have been replaced sometime in the 1800s. The window frames are the same, but the sash are different. Maybe the same time they replace the door. One of the things that I find really important in life is the fact that if the building can't be restored or it can't be preserved, what do you do next? Rehabilitation is really a key thing to save a building. It's oftentimes called adaptive reuse. It's defined as the act or process of making possible a compatible use for property through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving these portions or features which convey its historical, cultural, or architectural values. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to save the appearance of the building while finding a new use for it. And here again, there's standards for rehabilitation. So we have some idea of what we're doing. We have the Cody School. Some of you may or may not have been inside the Cody School. I got a chance to get inside while this process was just beginning. And I thought it was just a great building and really had a chance to become a residence, or residences. I mean, there were some wonderful original features in there. And here we are. They kept the lockers. They kept that little fountain. Great light in the building, which turned into great rooms. I know they'd miss them, but I think we did a good job.
Did they change the windows on that building?
They did.
The glass?
They changed. They put replacement windows in there. But they did a nice job. I mean, they chose windows that really matched what was there before, because you can't really tell. And that's the new version. By the chuckles, I'm not sure I need to talk too much about. But this is what you see a lot. You see a lot of what's considered remodeling. A lot of the original features are disappear, and this is where a lot of confusion happens. People will think that they're restoring a house when they're really changing the appearance of the house. And it's been going on for a long time. I mean, you don't have to live in this house. You could live in this house instead. I'll let you decide what's going on here. This is the original on the left. This is the new version on the right. And we have a door that doesn't quite match what was there originally. I'm sure most of you know the Patuxent Trading Post. This was an interesting one in terms of philosophy, because what we found, I was involved with building the windows for some of the restoration work that was done on the structure. There was a new roof put on, and new clapboards put on. And some of the people that were working on it had worked at, which was then known as Plymouth Plantation, and found that really the interpretation in 1930 wasn't really accurate to what we know now. So that since 1930, a lot of education's been done, a lot of learning's been done about how things were done in the 1600s. And so what we had was a structure that we had to do work on and had to restore. But do we restore it to 1930 or do we restore it to 1627? So what we really had in the end was a 1930s restoration of what they thought 1627 should look like. It's pretty close, and it really does well to give people a feel of what it was like in the 1600s. But it's not exactly a 1627. And then we have, of course, the Briggs McDermott house across the street, which is just a great structure, well preserved, went through a huge restoration project, and is kept up well. I'm always amazed every time I walk in the door over there. And so we are going over there afterwards in a few minutes. And I think you should really take a look, especially the painted ceilings and all of the work that's been done inside the structure when we go over there. Are there any questions about things so far?
The red house that you had up there with the front door?
Yeah.
It was a 1780 door. Why didn't you find a 1770 door and put that on?
Because they like that door.
Okay.
I'm with you, because that's the thing. Like you saw, it was in pieces. I could have built him a new door. I could have built him a reproduction door. But they liked that door. That came with the house when they got the house, and they had been opening and closing that door for the 50 years they owned the house, and that's the door they wanted. And here again, like I say, that's part of the story of the house. And so it's a matter of, do you stick with the story of the house or do you go back to a certain date? And that's really what we chose to do with that house, was have a progression of time with the house. Was that, some of it's 1800s and some of it's 1700s. And to tell a little bit of a personal story, kind of funny about it is that the glass that goes in these sash wasn't clear and perfectly made. It's what I call wavy glass, and when you look through it, it's got a little wave to it, and you can't quite see clearly through the glass. Well, the homeowner, she said, don't put too much of that in there. I want to be able to see out of my windows. And so typically when you do a restoration, you want to put as much of that in there as possible. But we kind of had to put some new glass in the windows because she wanted to be able to see out the window. So it's a difference between living in a museum like at Briggs McDermott House, and the difference between living in a house that's your own. Yep.
So did they have any kind of a storm window back then?
No.
So it's just that one pane?
It's the one pane of glass, yeah. And so...
So I take it that's a summer house?
No. No. It's their full-time residence house, and a lot of people living in 1700s houses with single pane glass. But typically, that's one of the questions I do get. Is the mainstay of what I do is I work on windows. That's a lot of the call that I get for is that I make and restore historic windows for historic houses. And the key thing with that, and I get that question about glass a lot. And the key thing is that really it isn't necessarily about the glass, it's about the air infiltration around the window or around the sash. And the thing to do is to weather strip the sash. And then if you put a good storm window on there, you come up with something that's very close to what the R value would be of a new double pane window. And so no, they didn't have storm windows at that time. And that brings another philosophy question about when you go to put storm windows on a historic house. There's the idea of, do you try to make a 1700 storm window, something that fits the structure, or do you do something that's what's called dateable and reversible? So you might want to put one of your philosophies might be to put an aluminum storm window on a 1700s house because that's clearly not 1700s. And so that shows that you know that you're putting something on there. Or you may want to go something that's more sympathetic to the structure. So that's what happens with that. And the other thing that I get a lot of questions about the windows and insulation was very interesting, especially that house, the red house. I should probably just zip back to it. If you can see right here, what's very interesting about this house and what's very standard about these houses of the time is there are no 2x4s. Is that this is a timber frame here, there's a post, there's a beam, and then what there are planks on the outside of the house. And so this is all there is that these planks are about 2 inches thick, they're long, they run from the foundation all the way up to the top beam. And so you can go out and you can spend a lot of money for our argon-filled window, but you have no insulation in the wall. And this is the way people live for hundreds of years. And there are ways to energize to make these houses more energy efficient if you want to put a little work into them. Typically what you do is you put insulation on the outside. You basically grow the house. You take all the components off, you put insulation on the outside, and then you put it back together again, you put all the components back in. Yep. Don't take the staircase out.
Gotcha.
It's one project I got into, and I got into it after a lot of demolition had been done.
Yeah.
And the people who were doing the demolition wanted to take the staircase out. The homeowner said no, and myself and some other people who do restoration work encouraged that decision because once you take the staircase out, then you have to meet code. Yeah, you have to meet code. You can make an original style staircase, as long as you have another code staircase in the house.
Oh, okay.
I did that in another situation where a 1700s house had burned, and the homeowners made a reproduction house, and in the back wing they had a full staircase, regular code staircase, and I wound up building the 1700 staircase in the front entrance. Yep.
When you're doing your work, have you ever come across any lead paint issues?
There are always lead paint issues. Yeah, yeah. So there are different ways, depending upon the situation that you're dealing with, there are different ways to deal with it. Yeah, there's always lead paint issues. The main thing is to be very careful of what you're doing. Sometimes you'll find shoes if you wind up breaking into behind a fireplace. I haven't myself found shoes, but I've been in job sites where they have found shoes, and that was very common for good luck to put shoes in behind the fireplace. And so sometimes you'll find those shoes. But other than that, I haven't really found much very interesting.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet.
When you did the repair, I think it was on this one with the, what's that called? They got the radius in it, top to bottom, and you put a scab patch on the bottom.
Yeah, the pilaster,
So what is that? Is that restoration, or is that?
that's restoration. Because what you're doing is you're really restoring, you're bringing it back to what it was originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
one there.
Yeah.
So
So
that's not preservation.
technically, no, because you're restoring what was there. I mean, it's sort of, it's in some ways it's a hybrid because you're preserving part of the original.
Yeah.
So this is where the two worlds start to blend a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, in the back.
When you're putting windows together, do you run into any issues with tempered glass requirements?
Yep, you do, and that's
Individual tempered,
get individual tempered panes, and it is possible to temper wavy glass. You send it out to the company, and they will temper it for you. There's usually a certain percentage of breakage that'll happen, but yeah, you have to watch that, especially if you're building doors or storm doors, and then the glass if you're building reproduction windows. Typically, if you're just restoring the originals, you don't have to worry about the tempered. But yeah, you have to follow the code for the tempered glass.
right?
Yep.
So I'm curious, in where the damage was done by a car, it must have been an insurance issue. How do the insurance companies handle restoration?
They usually don't care about the restoration necessarily in terms of what you're doing. In that instance, the insurance company wrote them a check for what they believed it would cost, and we wound up doing the work within the budget. And that's they don't.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there again, that's why I say that was one of the things that was really, really great about that project is that the people who owned the house had done a lot of work themselves when they were younger, and at this stage of their lives, they really couldn't do the work, and so they had a certain budget to work within, and that's what we did, and they were welcoming to us, and we made us part of their home and part of their family, and we were able to work within the budget and get it all together for them.
Do you build bridges?
No. And that, and to talk about budget, that's one of the things, it's, I work with on $1 million projects where you have to wear a hard hat, and it's a commercial construction company that's doing it, and I work with the individual homeowner that may have had their spouse die, and they love the house, and they have to be very careful about their budget. And so this all can be done within budget, within certain budgets and within certain parameters of cost. Typically what it costs me to restore a window is what it will cost to buy a high quality brand new window. And then you need to put that window in. And that oftentimes, like I say, what's interesting, like I say, with these windows here, this frame goes on the exterior of the house. And the sash fit within that frame. That gets nailed onto those planks on the exterior of the house. And so if you go to replace the window, You have to remove this frame entirely and then put another frame in, which then projects into the house because you only have a plank wall. So now you have to put new trim on. It starts to get expensive just to replace the window. You've already paid for the window. Now you're really altering all the trim inside. You're going to remove all the 1700s trim on the interior and the exterior. And so a lot of ways, it's often more cost efficient to restore the original window, put a storm window on it, and you're oftentimes better off cost-wise, and then you've saved the historic structure. Any other questions? This is great.